Listeners, welcome back to the second half of the feature show. In the first half, we were joined by Rachel Taylor, CTG Secondary Skit Lead, Sarah Hussain, current maths teacher, and Minhajur Rahman, current trainee teacher. In this half, we will be joined by my co-host, Amma Razem, along with Raza Ali, head of school at the Chalk Hills Academy. Raza joined the academy back in January from London, so you can hear him tell us about how his teaching journey began in London, but what brought him to join us here in Luton and why Chalk Hills specifically. A really great discussion, including what keeps him going in his career and what his aspirational vision for the academy is. Please do stay tuned.
Raza, describe for us your journey into teaching. Where did it all start?
Hi, Emma. My journey into teaching started straight after I graduated from university. If I'm honest with you, it wasn't a journey that I had planned from an early age. When we are young and when you get asked a question, what do you want to be when you grow older? My answers actually were, some would say, typical. One was around wanting to be a footballer. The other one actually was to be involved one way or another in the emergency services, only because I like the idea of driving an emergency response car and the adrenaline that came with it. So that was typically what I wanted to be when I was very young. But then what happened is, as I was growing older, as I went through my GCSEs, my A levels, I then realized actually teaching is a profession that was becoming attractive only because of the impact my teachers had on me. But even still, it wasn't a kind of firm decision at that stage in any way. I went into university, and when I went to university, I actually read economics at university. And the majority of my cohort at the time decided to go into a career related to finance, banking, consultancy of some form. And initially, after I did my second year of my degree, I had completed an internship at a bank, an investment bank in London. And I was offered a graduate job, and the plan had been to be sort of going into investment banking. That was going to be my initial actually career start. But due to the financial crash, and then what happened ultimately after that was that I was presented with an opportunity to go into teaching. I felt, actually, let me go and test teaching as a career for a few years, and then ultimately what happened is I fell in love with it, and I've never looked back. So I have made that career choice, and I believe it's one of the best career choices that you can make.
That's a wonderful description, and many listening in will be smiling when you describe the dreams of being a footballer. The emergency services one, that one again, really interesting. So you're not from Luton. You're from London, is that right? And you grew up in London?
Yeah. So I've lived in London. I still currently live in London. I've lived in London all my life. I went to school in London. I went to university in London. I started my teaching career in London. So I come from East London, the east part of London. I originally grew up in an area called Walthamstow. So that's sort of considered northeast London on the map. And I've lived there all my life. As I said, I live there still now. And growing up in that area, I was very, very blessed because I grew up in a very, very culturally diverse area. I very quickly, from an early age, not only did I learn values at home, but even I learned values from my community. You know, values such as looking after your neighbor, supporting the elderly, doing charity work, supporting the local community wherever and whenever possible. And I was, my parents are probably like most parents. They gave me a really, really good understanding of why education was important. My parents themselves, they didn't go university. My parents came originally from Pakistan, and when my father came here sort of about 40 years ago from Pakistan, he immediately started to work, and he immediately started to work in a factory. My mother was a housewife simply because she was very busy raising myself, but also my other four siblings. And my parents, as I said, they weren't educated. None of my parents actually went to university. None of them even went into college, if I may say so. But like I said, one of the things they kept insisting on us is that please, 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 just try your best in school. And education is of so importance. And I'm starting to realize that more and more as I progress into my career now. And that's the same message I give to the community I'm currently serving in Luton, to say that please value your education, because somewhere down the line it will come back to help you.
Raza, it's really interesting, some of the stuff you've said, and we will unpick that, especially the those elements of your own particular upbringing and those values around supporting local initiatives, the elderly through community work, because that is an important part of what you're doing at Chalkfields Academy. But just picking up on the points you've said earlier on about studying economics, which I did. I didn't do it to a degree level. I barely scraped through at A level, but I can really empathize when what you've described there about friends that have gone on into some of them very affluent careers in finance and banking. But you said that you don't no regrets. This is teaching is the best decision you've ever made. Is that fair?
100%. 100%. Because when I first started teaching, I should have actually said this earlier on. I started, some of you might have heard of the prestigious Teach First program, which essentially, in a nutshell, it's a graduate program. It's actually one of the biggest graduate programs in the country. And essentially, the mission of Teach First is to find the best graduates in the country and put them into the most challenging and disadvantaged schools so that we can have the biggest impact. And what we mean by impact is Teach First has a mission to essentially eradicate educational disadvantage. And when I was sold that mission, it really, really resonated with me, because growing up in a working class background where I had my parents not go to university, I didn't really have any of those educational role models, so to speak. And I know that the communities that I was raised in, and certainly the communities I serve right now, that problem still exists. In fact, in some cases, I feel like that problem has even grown further. You can just point to numerous pieces of research which shows that actually the inequality gap in the UK and beyond is certainly not narrowing. It's certainly widening in terms of financial inequality. It's also widening in terms of educational inequality in some respects as well. So when Teach First came along in one of the graduate fairs, and certainly when they approached me as I was completing my economics degree, that whole mission about addressing educational disadvantage really, really resonated with me. Helping the people that needed it most. That was something that I've always wanted to do in one form or the other. So it was initially a 2-year commitment. They said it's a 2-year graduate program. You come in, you try teaching, and if you don't like it, you can go and return to your financial career. And if you do like it, then we're going to continue to develop you. We're going to grow you as a leader and support you in whatever avenue you tend to choose after that. So I did it for 2 years. I started teaching in a very, very challenging school in West London. It's a school pretty much close to Paddington rail station in central London. Now, normally what happens is when I give people that location, they tend to think, oh, sounds like a really nice location. It must be a really good school. But what was so interesting when I started that role was what I spoke about inequality. It was so visible in that area, because sometimes you had certain streets in that area where one side of the road, you had very, very affluent houses and private schools, and literally you crossed the road and you had local council estates, and they had the challenges that come with that as well. So when I started my teaching career in that environment, I did it for 2 years, and I was very fortunate to have made the impact that I did at such an early stage, but it certainly made me even more determined. I felt at that point, actually, my job is not finished. I've still got a lot more to do in education. And 2 years then very quickly became 3 years, became 5 years, and then now it's led to 12 years for me. I've been in education for 12 years. And again, I say it in confidence, or with a lot of passion, that this is a job that I would certainly recommend. It is a challenging job, but any person that wishes to make a visible difference to society, I would say teaching is one of the best jobs to do that.
Reflecting on your own upbringing, and in particular the teachers that were part of your education journey, how much of what you see in how much you saw in them, it was part of your value system growing up as well? Because growing up, we would have had the disciplinarian teachers, we would have the teachers that were encouraging, you had the ones that were quite determined and to really do what they could as well. So what sort of examples are you taking from the teachers you've had in the past?
I think the best way to answer that for me would be to say, firstly, in terms of those values and the importance of teachers, I was certainly, like most young people are, they're certainly told that at home. The classic line I remember my parents always telling me was that you've got to show teachers the same respect as you show to your parents. And you kept hearing that, but if I'm being very honest with you, Emma, I didn't really take that as seriously. Certainly when I first started my secondary schooling when I was 11 years old, I didn't really take that as seriously as I probably perhaps should have. I suppose the penny dropped really when I got to year 10, and certainly when I got to year 11, because up until I would say year 9, some parts of year 10, I wasn't really taking education as seriously as I probably should have. I certainly didn't look at teachers in the way I look at teachers now, and certainly as I looked at teachers when I went into college and beyond. But I remember one teacher, and it's still, the memory still sort of is detailed in my head today. And I remember there was one teacher, it's actually my business studies teacher, and she came up to me and she realized that actually I was underperforming in across all my subjects. And the one thing she said to me, she took me to the side and she goes, "Raza, there is something about you. You have got a lot of potential. Unfortunately, you're not fulfilling that potential. And this is your chance to really fulfill your potential." And up until that point, I never had a teacher ever say that to me. And I suppose that was the moment where I really sort of reflected and I thought, hang on, I've seen somebody else has come up to me and said I've got potential. And if somebody else, and certainly the teacher, is believing me, then surely there's some truth in that. And I suppose it was that moment where I felt, you know what, no, I'm going to take a step back. I am actually going to take my studies more seriously. And I suppose from year 11 onwards, that's when I really, really put my head down and really worked hard. And because of that hard work and I suppose the belief that my teacher and then other teachers that followed had in me, that was the real turning point and led me to the success I've got and have had since then.
Listeners, you're joining us here on The Future Show. I'm your host, Amr Azam, and we're listening to Raza Ali, head of school at Chalk Hills Academy here in Luton. Raza, tell us about what brought you to Luton.
That's a really, really good question, Emma. And I get asked that question quite frequently. They said, Raza, look, you've had so much success in London, and why Luton? And I still remember the first day I landed here. And when I chose Luton initially, the reason why I chose Luton is because I can draw a lot of similarities in Luton as to where I am in East London. It's, like I said earlier on, it's got a diverse community. It's got young people that really have potential to do well, have a lot of potential to do well. And equally, Luton geographically is not too far from London as well. So for me, it was a really, really good opportunity to, on a personal level, to go outside my comfort zone, because like I said earlier on, I've only known London. I was born in London. I was raised in London. I've only worked in London. I was educated in London. I've never actually worked or studied outside of London, so to speak. So this was my first opportunity, A, to get out my comfort zone so that I can challenge myself. But B, I chose Luton because I thought actually there's a lot of similarities to London that I see in Luton. The only difference is London, from an educational standpoint, has really, really progressed. And it has a number of schools that I'm sure you're very, very familiar with that have done really, really well over the last sort of 10 to 12 years. And I feel that actually there's certain things that we all can learn from some of the London schools that we can bring into Luton and hopefully see the same results. So that kind of answers the first part of your question as to why Luton. But the other thing that I chose Luton, but more specifically the Chalk Hills Academy, is because Chalk Hills Academy as a school is very, very blessed with great facilities. It's also very blessed to be part of a multi-academy trust, the Shared Learning Trust, which, for those of you who don't know, it's a family of 5 schools, both primary and secondary, and it's making fantastic progress and inroads into the educational landscape within Luton and beyond. But one thing I really wanted to do is I really wanted to take on a challenge where I knew I could go into a school and really make that desired impact. And that was certainly true when I first came here, as I was kind of alluding to earlier on. My very first day, I came in to the Chalk Hills Academy and I did a presentation to all staff. It was my very, very first keynote presentation. And I was talking to the staff body, the whole staff body, of which we have 150 plus members of staff. And I said to them, I want to make Chalk Hills Academy world class. I want to make it the best school, not just in Luton and Bedfordshire, but I want to make it one of the best schools in the country. And then I had a few people within the audience actually giggle. And I remember one person politely came up to me afterwards and said, Raza, you do realize we're in Lucy Farm. And to which my response was, and so what's the problem? So what if we're in Lucy Farm? And they go, Raza, you're being too ambitious. And that one moment gave me even more motivation to think, you know what? Actually, I'm going to prove whoever the skeptics are in the local community and within the school, I'm now even more determined to prove them wrong, to prove to them that actually these young people have so much potential. And as a school, we should also be aspirational for them, just like my teacher was, my business studies teacher was when I was young. We should be following a similar note and be aspirational for these young people, because if we're aspirational and if we combine that with their potential, then together we can really, really go places. So that was the reason for coming into Luton, but that's also the reason as to why I've come into Chalk Hills Academy, because right now I'm even more determined than ever to make a real difference to our young people in the local community.
Raza, you've mentioned there the wanting to take on the challenge now. I suppose to further enhance your challenge, you got a pandemic to go with it as well. So describe the past 18 months for us as a head of school at one of our local schools. What's that been like for yourself? And I know when we met in the summer at Inspire Eid, you were speaking about the positive nature of your students and importantly your staff as well in just getting on with the challenges and uncertainty that the pandemic brought with it.
Amar, the pandemic, I mean, we've heard this said many times. This pandemic, these last 18 months, as you've touched on, I'm not just speaking this for myself. I speak probably on behalf of any educator out there. These have been probably the toughest 18 months of my educational career, my teaching career. However, one thing I've also learned, and certainly a real positive out of all this experience, is that being positive is so important. There is a real danger here, Amar, and I say this to students, I say this to staff on a daily basis, and I have been saying this for the last 8 months. There's a real danger here that if we get sucked into negativity, if we continue to use what I call deficit language and say, oh, you know, we've got a lot of catching up to do, or, you know, we've got, we're really behind and things are not going to be easy. I say to my staff, and have been saying for a long time now, that we've got to stop using that deficit language and we've got to be positive, because if we're positive, then that positivity ultimately is going to rub off on the young people. We've had a tough 18 months as educationalists. I would argue that young people have even had a tougher 18 months as young people. So if we on top of that start using deficit language, we're certainly not going to solve the problem. So the first thing that I've learned from this experience, it is really, really important to be positive and continue to be positive in the language you use, in the policies and strategies you use, and ultimately having that resilience and hope to say, yes, we're going to keep going. Yes, things are going to get better. And ultimately knowing that actually you're not the only school that's in this position. There are thousands of schools up and down the country, across the world, that are having the same challenges as what you're facing right now. So everybody's in the same position. However, how you're going to move forward from this position, like I said, is largely to be positive. I suppose the other thing that I've really, really found helpful, supportive, is I've been very, very fortunate to have an amazing staff body here at the Chalk Hills Academy. Every single member of staff in this academy, from the receptionist that you see at the front of the school, all the way to the CEO of our trust, we genuinely go over and beyond for our young people and our families. That's not just within school hours, but that's also including of when students need support outside of school as well. So, for example, we've noticed before the summer that many of our young people within the community, many of our families were struggling to put food on the table. So as a school initiative, we decided to take part in setting up a local food bank and supporting other food bank agencies. And we wanted to make sure that where possible, we are supporting our young people beyond the school gates as well. So our staff really, really have been going over and beyond, and they continue to do so. And the final thing that's really, really been helpful in the last 18 months and continues to be a help today is, again, I'm very, very fortunate to be part of a multi-academy trust. In our case, the Shared Learning Trust, because you've seen, Amar, it's been very, very publicized, and you would know this as a journalist as well, that we've not had the best of guidance in terms of timing from the government, from central government. And what schools have faced over the last 18 months is a lot of the time they've had to deal with last minute announcements. They've had to think a lot of things. They've had to think on their feet quite a lot. They've had to be flexible, adaptable. They've had to be innovative. We've done all of that, but equally, we've also been supported heavily by the Shared Learning Trust. They've taken a lot of that pressure away from me as head of school. They've supported me where I've not been sure around sort of the clarity of government guidance. I've been able to reach out to the Shared Learning Trust. So they've been incredibly supportive in answering any questions that I'm not sure what the answer is. And they've also been supportive in making sure the school is able to run as best as it can in these challenging circumstances. So all those three areas coupled together have really got us through this challenging episode, and it's also set us up well for any challenges to come as well.
Listeners, we're coming to the end of our interview with Raza Ali, head of school at Chalk Hills Academy here in Luton. Some really, really fascinating insight into his career journey. Raza, we've got about 2 minutes left. So just very quickly then, any words of guidance or inspiration for those unsure about a career in teaching, like you were, as you say, 10, 12 years ago when you started your career. So any words of inspiration there?
My last two pieces of information that I would like to finish off on is, firstly, like I've touched on earlier on, if you are an individual that is thinking about teaching, if you're an individual that's really, really passionate about making a real difference to the lives of young people, then teaching is one of the best careers that you can do that. However, I'm also somebody who's very pragmatic, and I will say this because this is important. Teaching is also a very challenging career. You will need to show a lot of resilience. You will need to put in a lot of hours. And you will need to enjoy working with young people. And the one thing I think that will get you through all those challenges, and certainly the one that's helped me, is knowing, or certainly finding, what I would say is the passion, your inner passion. Always asking yourself, why are you doing the job that you're doing? I have a number of challenges on a daily basis. I have ups and downs like everybody else does. But one thing I've used to really, really help me in the last 12 years is whenever I do have a down, I always say, why are you in teaching, Raza? And when I answer that question, for me, it's very simple. I say, I'm in teaching because I really, really want to help young people. That gets me back up again and reinvigorates me and has that, plants that positivity back in my body. So it's really, really important that you have that passion.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much, Emma.
No, it's been absolutely fascinating having you on, Raza, for your debut on Inspire FM. Listeners, do join us again on the future show. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.